The frost clung to the fence posts like silver moss, the kind that glistened before the dawn melted it away. A wind moved across the dry fields, rattling the brittle cornstalks left standing like forgotten bones. In the half-light of morning, the pigpen sat quiet behind the barn, shadows still stretched long across the dirt. And in that corner, curled beneath a blanket of rags and mud, lay a girl. She didn't stir when the pigs snorted near her feet, didn't flinch when one nosed at her ankle. She was small, though not a child, her limbs too thin for the shape of her bones. Her hair clung to her jaw in wet snarls, and her bare legs were blue at the knees. From the porch, Holt Merrick watched. He'd seen coyotes sleep softer than she did. She hadn't moved since he spotted her in the pen just before midnight, hunched beneath the broken awning that no longer kept out wind or rain. He hadn't disturbed her then. Some things wake like cornered animals. He'd seen it in wounded horses and war-tired men. He saw it now. But dawn was coming fast, and the pigs were beginning to root. He stepped down the porch stairs, boots slow and heavy. The cold bit through his coat, but he didn't rush. As he neared the pen, one pig snorted, startled, and trotted off. The girl stirred. Her eyes opened, green, sharp as prairie grass under a storm sky. They locked on him as if she were ready to bolt, though her limbs barely obeyed her. She sat up slow, spine stiff, arms wrapping instinctively around herself. "You hungry?" Holt asked, voice gravel-soft. She didn't answer. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a cloth-wrapped heel of bread. Brown, thick-crusted, still warm from his stove that morning. He stepped just close enough to place it on the edge of the pen's broken gate. Then he walked away. She didn't move until he reached the porch again. Then, slow as a creature testing its legs, she crawled toward the bread. She took it like it might vanish, ate with her head bowed and her fingers shaking, tearing it into small pieces, crumbs falling into the straw. Holt said nothing. She didn't thank him, didn't need to. An hour later, when the sun pushed higher and the pigs grew restless, he brought out a basin of warm water and a thin blanket, set both near the barn door, then went back to chopping wood. She didn't come right away, but by midday, she was gone from the pen. He found her curled on the hay beside the gray mare, shivering, blanket pulled tight around her. The bread crust was tucked in her lap, like she didn't trust it to stay hers. He didn't speak to her that night, just lit a lantern outside the barn so she wouldn't wake in the dark. Left another piece of bread near her bedroll. No questions, no rules. By the third day, she was sweeping the porch. Didn't ask permission, just picked up the broom with the same grim purpose as someone digging a grave. Holt watched her through the kitchen window. Her movements were careful, her back straight, like she was used to being judged. He noticed her hands, cracked at the knuckles, a web of small scars across her left wrist. When he brought out the coffee, she flinched at first, then took it with both hands. Sipped without looking up. Steam rose between them. "I'm Willa," she murmured, voice thin. He nodded. Holt. That was all. In town, it didn't take long for the whispers to begin. Holt Merrick hadn't brought a woman to his land in over a decade. Folks remembered the wife who died from fever and the child who came too early to live. He was quiet, always had been, but good with his word. Still, small towns chew truth into pulp, spit out whatever sticks. By the time Holt hitched up to fetch flour and salt, the general store was a nest of gossip. "She was sleeping in the pigpen, so I heard," Cecily Runyon drawled behind the counter, one brow cocked. "And now she's sweeping his porch like a wife." A boy stocking shelves snorted. "Maybe she's just good at grunt work." Holt placed his goods on the counter without looking at either of them. Cecily pressed, lips pursed. "You got company, Holt? Should we be setting a table for two at the potluck next week?" He met her gaze. "She's not company. She's hungry." He paid with coin and silence. Left the store without explaining a damn thing. That evening, Willa sat on the porch steps with a bar of soap in her lap, scrubbing at her feet with water from the basin. Her heels were raw, toenails dark from cold and dirt. Holt brought out a worn dress, a patched thing from a flour sack, and bits of linen he found in a trunk. Willa stared at it, then at him, her expression unreadable. "It's clean," he said. "It'll fit." She reached for it without a word. That night, she folded her old rags and set them by the barn door like an offering. She started sleeping inside the house after that, not in his room, but in the storage room off the kitchen. He set a cot there, nothing more. She swept the floor each morning before he rose, left coffee on the stove even when her hands still trembled too badly to pour it clean. Holt didn't press her, didn't ask where she came from, or why her shoulders jerked at loud sounds, or what drove her to sleep beside swine. But he saw it, the bruises fading like dusk shadows on her arms, the way she flinched at compliments and shrank from mirrors. Willa didn't talk much, but she listened, watched the world like it might turn on her at any moment. She stared too long at children when they passed the gate, eyes not soft, but heavy. Sometimes she walked to the fence line just to watch the prairie. Holt never followed her, never told her to stay. On the 5th morning, she stood at the stove before him, held out a plate of fried potatoes. "They ain't good," she said. He took them, ate in silence. She watched him the whole time. When he finished, she sat across from him, hands in her lap, jaw working. "They sold me," she said, eyes down. "Wasn't even for money, just land." Holt waited. "My father was a preacher. Landowner offered him a tract near the river. Said he'd settle the deed if he gave me over." He didn't speak. "I walked 3 days after I ran. Slept in barns. Then I ran out of barns." She looked up then. Her eyes weren't soft. "Why'd you let me stay?" Holt took a long sip from his mug. His voice was low. "Because no one should have to earn bread when they're half dead." Willa blinked. She stood and walked to the porch. Sat down, still barefoot, eyes toward the field. That evening, Holt found her setting a table for 2. He said nothing, and when she placed the last cup down, her fingers brushed his just once. Not a touch, just a passing warmth. She didn't flinch that time. The next morning, she was gone before dawn. Holt's heart kicked, but he found her near the pen, kneeling by the pigs, feeding them the crust of her own bread. One of them nuzzled her hand. She smiled, small, faint, but there. She looked up, met his eyes. "You ever name them?" she asked. "No. They ain't pets." She nodded. "Still, nice to be called something once in a while." He didn't answer, but when he walked back to the porch, he left a new loaf cooling on the sill, wrapped in cloth, waiting for her. The pigs snorted in the pen, the frost beginning to thaw. Willa sat among them, cleaner now, steadier, but still watchful. Holt stood by the porch rail, arms crossed. Between them was the silence of 2 people not yet whole, but no longer broken the same way. She tore the bread, gently this time. A girl who once slept in mud, a man who once lived in it, and a sliver of warmth between them that neither dared name, but both began to carry. Rain came down in silver threads, cold and constant, drumming on the tin roof and soaking the earth until it turned to soup. The sky had lost its color, hanging low and gray like an old dishcloth, heavy with judgment. Willa stood barefoot beneath the eaves, arms crossed over her chest, letting the downpour wash her like a penance. Her dress clung to her like a second skin, patched and thin, and the soap she rubbed into her arms left white streaks against bruised flesh. She worked methodically, like it was a task to be endured, not a comfort. Inside the barn, Holt paused mid-saddle. From the open door, he watched her in the rain, hair plastered to her jaw, a quiet fierceness in her eyes. He didn't call to her. He simply hung the saddleback on its peg and left her to the storm. By noon, the rain lightened to a whisper. Willa came in dripping, tracking mud across the porch. She didn't apologize. She just peeled off the wet dress behind the half-closed barn door and stepped into the dry one he'd left folded on a bale of hay. It had taken him most of a day to sew it, awkward stitches, uneven hem, but clean. She ran her fingers across the seams, touched the bit of blue embroidery at the collar. It wasn't pretty, but it was careful. Someone had made it with their own hands. She didn't thank him, but she wore it. The next morning, she asked if he needed anything from town. Holt turned from the post he was splitting. "You want something?" "Needles," she said. "Thread, if there's any not rotten. And matches. Yours are soft at the heads." He studied her face. "I'll bring him." She wiped her hands on her apron. "I can walk. I ain't helpless." "I didn't say you were." Their eyes held for a beat, the kind that could tip toward anger or understanding. She turned first, jaw tight, fingers twitching like she wanted to snap but knew it would cost her. She went anyway. The walk to town took her past 3 fields and a creek. Her boots, borrowed from Holt's dead wife, were stiff and too big, but they kept the mud off her feet. As she approached the general store, she straightened her back and tugged the hem of her dress flat. Inside, the bell above the door rang sharp and cold. Cecily Runyon looked up from her ledger. "Well, if it isn't the girl who sleeps with pigs and ranchers." A man near the counter chuckled under his breath. Willa's hand tightened around the coin in her palm. She didn't speak. Cecily leaned forward, voice low but slicing. "We got rules here, sweetheart. You pay or you leave. Ain't no bartering with favors." Willa placed her coin on the counter. Needles. Thread. Matches. Cecily's eyes slid over her like a butcher weighing spoiled meat. "You ain't gonna last long. Holt's just bored. He'll spit you out soon enough. You think he's different? They're all the same." "I didn't ask your opinion," Willa said, voice level. "You didn't have to. We all see what you are." Willa turned on her heel, walking out before her knees betrayed her. She made it 3 steps past the porch before the tears came. Hot, useless things she hated. Behind the livery, she pressed her face against the boards and sank to her knees. She hated this town. Hated its eyes, its mouths, its sharp little words. "Should have stayed with the pigs," she muttered. "Then you wouldn't have seen the storm pass." She jerked upright. Holt stood at the corner, holding a burlap sack. He didn't look at her tears. Just offered the bag. "Got what you needed." "I told you I could do it," she snapped. "You could have." "Then why?" "Because you shouldn't have to walk through that." She wiped her nose with her sleeve. "They think I'm nothing. Worse than nothing." His voice was quiet. "They don't get to say what you are." Willa didn't speak again until they reached the wagon. She climbed up without help, settled in beside him. The ride home was silent but not cold. That night, she stitched a tear in one of his shirts, fingers working fast and neat. He watched her from the doorway, arms crossed, the lamplight catching the silver in his hair. "You sew like you were taught with a stick." She didn't look up. "I was taught with a switch." He nodded once and said nothing more. It was 3 days before she asked if she could ride the mare. Holt blinked. "You know horses?" She gave him a look like he just asked if she knew how to breathe. "Better than people." He let her. She didn't ride far. Just out past the creek, where the sun hit the grass in slanted gold stripes. She sat on the saddle like it belonged to her, hair pulled back, face clear of soot and shame. From the field, he watched her laugh, just once, as the mare kicked into a canter. It was the first time he saw her face soften, as if she remembered something lighter than survival. When she returned, cheeks flushed. She dismounted with a grace born of practice. She handed the reins to Holt and didn't say a word. That evening, they ate supper at the same table, not across from each other, but side by side. Their elbows touched once. Neither moved away. She set the dishes in the wash basin after, humming something low under her breath. He stood in the doorway, drying his hands on a rag. "You hum when you're nervous," he said. "I hum when I'm thinking." "What were you thinking about?" She glanced at him. "That maybe I don't have to stay broken." He didn't smile, but his voice was softer than she'd ever heard. "You don't." The next morning, they heard the wagon before it reached the gate. A stranger sat tall in the seat, a broad man red-faced, with liquor on his breath and a bad temper slung over his shoulders like a coat. Willa stepped out of the barn, hands clenched. Holt was already there, standing between her and the road. The man pointed a thick finger. "That's her. She's mine. Ran off in the night like a thieving bitch." "You got no claim here," Holt said. "She was bought. Fair and square. She's not property." The man laughed mean and low. "Ain't that what you're making her now?" Willa stepped forward then, eyes hard. "If you try to lay a hand on me, I'll cut you open." Her voice didn't shake. The man looked at her like she'd grown fangs. Holt didn't flinch. The sheriff arrived not long after, riding slow, eyes scanning the standoff like a man watching Wolf's posture. "You causing trouble again, Hess?" Sheriff Cale asked, already dismounting. Hess pointed at Willa. "She's mine." The sheriff spat into the dirt. "Got papers?" "No." "Then you ain't got nothing but a bad attitude. Get." Hess grumbled, but he left. Willa didn't move until the wagon wheels were just dust. Later, she sat on the porch steps, knees pulled to her chest. Holt brought her a cup of warm milk. She didn't drink it, just held it between her palms. "I hate that they think they know me," she said. "They don't. I'm still dirty to them. You're clean where it counts." She turned to him, brow furrowed. "Why were you nice to me?" "Because somebody ought to be." She stared at him for a long moment, then sipped the milk. That night, she left a slice of bread on his plate before he even asked. He didn't touch it right away, just looked at her across the lamplight. "Thank you," he said. She nodded. "I'll sew you a new shirt tomorrow. That one's too worn to patch." In the distance, thunder rolled low across the plain. She didn't flinch this time. And for the first time in years, she went to sleep with the door unlocked. The jar slipped from her hand and shattered. Not loudly, just a soft crack of defeat, like ribs breaking under pressure. It had been a good jar once, thick-glassed and honey-colored, meant for preserves. Now it lay scattered on the wood floor, and Willa stood above it, barefoot, staring at the shards like they'd spoken a truth she didn't want to hear. She didn't cry. She knelt. Her fingers, so used to dirt and thread, moved with care as she gathered the pieces into a cracked enamel pan. A sliver cut her palm. She flinched, hissed, then pressed the cut between her teeth. Blood bloomed metallic on her tongue. From the doorway, Holt watched. He didn't move. He could see the tension in her shoulders, the stiff line of her jaw. This wasn't about the jar. "You all right?" he asked finally. She didn't look at him, just dropped it. He stepped forward, his boots quiet on the boards. "Glass ain't worth bleeding over." "Wasn't the glass," she muttered. He crouched beside her. She shifted, not away, but enough to give him room. He reached for her hand, and she gave it, reluctantly. His fingers were rougher than hers, but steadier. He wrapped a strip of clean cloth around her palm, winding it twice before tying the knot. She looked at him then. Not soft, just steady. "I like that jar. I've got others." "That one was mine." He nodded. "Then I'll fix it." "You can't fix glass." "Maybe not," he said, "but I can try." She looked at him like she almost believed that, then stood, carrying the pan of broken pieces to the porch where the afternoon sun spilled in. She sat cross-legged on the stoop, sorting through what could be saved. That night, she melted wax over the stove, poured it into the seams of the jar she'd reassembled like a puzzle. The cracks held. Imperfect, yes, but it stood on its own. Holt didn't say a word, just watched from the doorway with something like respect in his eyes. The days grew longer. The prairie, once brittle with frost, stretched green under a blue that belonged only to the west. Willa began to hum more often, and sometimes when she thought no one heard, she'd sing a few soft lines of hymns, half-forgotten verses that sounded like someone else's memory. She worked hard, cleaned the barn, groomed the horses, fixed the sagging step on the porch without being asked. Her presence filled the place slowly, like spring thaw creeping through cold ground. One evening, over stew, she spoke without prompting. "He hit me the first night." Holt didn't look up. He just kept eating, slow and calm. Didn't say a word, just backhanded me, because I looked at his ledger. Told me girls like me didn't need to know about land. Holt placed his spoon down. "Was that Hess?" She nodded. "He kept me locked in the cellar when company came. Didn't want folks seeing I was more bone than bride." "Why were you telling me now?" "Because I need you to know who I was before this. Before here." He didn't reach for her hand or offer platitudes. Just said, "I knew already." "You did." He met her eyes. "Folks don't sleep in pig pens for fun." That silenced her, but not with shame. With understanding. The next morning, they moved the fence line together. Holt dug the posts, while Willa braced them with her shoulder, driving each one deeper into the earth. It was slow work, but steady. She never complained. They ate lunch in a field, backs against the fence, sharing cornbread and jerky from a tin. She laughed once, sharp and sudden, when a ground squirrel tried to steal her biscuit. Holt turned his head, smiling quietly. "You're not who you were." "Neither are you," she said. He looked at her then. Really looked. "What do you mean?" "You don't flinch when I speak anymore." He took that in, nodding once. "Maybe I was scared I'd say the wrong thing. And now, I figure saying nothing's worse." That night, she brought out the jar, set it between them on the table, with a tiny candle flickering inside. The wax shimmered through the cracks, turning them gold. "Still leaks," she said. "Still stands," he answered. She reached into her pocket and took out a folded square of paper. Unfolded, it revealed a photograph, faded, dog-eared. A young girl stood beside an older man in preacher's robes. They weren't smiling. "That's him," she said. "My father. He used to quote scripture with one hand and gamble with the other." Holt looked at the photo, then at her. "You look like you used to trust people." "I did." She slid the photo back into her pocket. "Then I stopped." "Why'd you trust me?" "I didn't. Not at first." "And now?" She didn't answer. She didn't have to. That trust was tested 3 days later. Willa was out near the barn when a rider came down the hill, tall, coat flapping, the smell of trouble arriving ahead of him like sour wind. Holt stepped off the porch before the man even dismounted. Willa stayed near the fence, hands tense. The rider swung down, spurs clinking. "Name's Jory Hess," he said, grinning with too many teeth. "Kin to Cyrus. Heard tell he lost himself a woman down this way." Willa didn't speak, didn't move. Her face blanked, but her shoulders curled slightly, like a page folding in on itself. "Town says you're keeping her," Jory went on, turning to Holt. "That right?" "She's free here," Holt replied calm. "Free's just another word for loose." Jory spat in the dirt. "Figure I might collect what Cyrus never did." Holt didn't raise his voice. "You're leaving. You gonna make me?" Willa stepped forward, her voice low. "If he doesn't, I will." Jory turned to her, eyes narrowing. "You forget your place, girl." "I've never known it," she replied. Jory took a step forward. Holt's hand dropped to the axe leaning against the porch rail. Not a threat, just a reminder. Jory looked between them, then spat again. "Ain't worth it." He mounted and rode off, but not fast. Like a man who wanted to make sure he left a shadow behind. That night, Willa sat in the barn, her hands shaking. "You did good," Holt said, standing in the doorway. "I didn't feel brave. Didn't need to." She looked down. "I thought maybe I was past being scared. Guess I'm not. Fear don't mean you're weak." "What does it mean then?" He thought a moment. "Means you've got something worth holding on to." Her throat tightened. She looked away, then back. "Do you regret letting me stay?" "No." "Even with the gossip?" "I don't keep company with gossip." She smiled, small and tired. "Then I guess I'm safe." He nodded once. "You are." Later, as the wind rattled the roof and the moon poured silver over the prairie, she brought the cracked jar to his room, set it by his bedside, lit candle glowing inside. She didn't say anything, just left it there like a thank you she didn't know how to give. And in the dark, with that golden light flickering over the seams of his worn wood walls, Holt understood what it meant. He hadn't fixed the jar. She had. The wind howled like a dying thing across the prairie that night. It tore through the wheat stubble, kicked up dry dust from the wagon path, and rattled the loose tin on Holt Merrick's barn like old bones. The kind of wind that made men check their latches and women hush their children without knowing why. Willa lay on her cot, half asleep, wrapped in a quilt stitched by some other woman's hands. Her eyes fluttered open to the scent of smoke, not the kind from a hearth, but acrid, wild, and rising fast. Her heartbeat quickened. In one breath, she was upright. In the next, she was barefoot and running. Outside, the barn glowed at its base, orange threads licking at the dry hay. Embers caught in the wind, spiraling upward like fireflies drunk on destruction. She shouted Holt's name, voice ragged, and sprinted into the yard. He was already there, shovel in hand, beating at the flames near the door. His coat was half buckled, boots untied. The fire climbed fast, eating at the wood like it had been waiting for this night. She saw it immediately. The bucket line was too slow. The roof would catch next. Without thinking, Willa ran to the paddock, flung open the gate, and began leading the horses out one by one, her hands firm even as smoke stung her eyes. The maras bucked and shied, but she whispered to them like they were children, "Steady, steady, stay with me." Behind her, the barn groaned. Holt grabbed a second bucket, water sloshing over his boots. "Back away from the west wall," he shouted. She obeyed without question, dragging the last filly toward the fence line. A loud crack split the air. The roof above the tack room gave way. Flames burst up like a god's anger, lighting the sky in violent gold. For one breathless moment, they stood frozen in the blaze's shadow. Willa looked down the hill. Torches. 3 of them. Men on foot. One limping. One carrying something heavy. Her breath caught. She knew that figure, the lurch of the left leg, the slant of his shoulders. Jory Hess. She didn't wait for words. She ran. Holt stepped in front of her, without needing to be asked. "Get behind me," he said low. The men were drunk. Faces flushed, eyes glassy with rage and liquor. "Well, well," Jory spat. "I figured if you wouldn't give her back, we'd just torch the sin right out of this land." Holt didn't speak. He stood solid, shovel still in hand, face blank as a weathered post. "You think you're righteous, old man?" Another sneered. "Keeping some whore like she's your salvation." Willa moved from behind him, slow and certain. Her voice came flat, cold as creekstone. "I'm not yours to burn." Jory stepped forward. "You were bought. You're mine." "No," Holt said. "She isn't." "And what are you going to do?" Jory grinned. "Beat me with your shovel?" No, Holt's voice turned quiet. "Dangerous. But I'll bury you with it." Sheriff Dino Cale rode into the yard like a specter, lanterns swinging from his saddle horn. He saw the fire, the men, the standoff. The wind whipped his coat as he dismounted, rifle slung over one shoulder. He didn't shout, just walked forward with the calm of a man who'd seen enough death to recognize the scent of it brewing. "What's going on here?" he asked, tone flat. Jory blinked, then stepped back. "We was just set in a warning." Sheriff looked at the barn, flames licking lower, now, thanks to Holt's buckets. He turned to Willa, eyes meeting hers. "You all right?" She nodded once. "They came to burn me out. Looks like they came to burn out their own shame." He turned to the men. "Drop your torches. Walk away." One man hesitated. Sheriff's hand moved near his rifle. That was enough. The torches hit the dirt. The men followed. Sheriff lingered. "You press charges?" "No," Holt said. Willa stared. "Why not?" "Because I'd rather fix my fence than sit in a courtroom full of men like them." Cale nodded once. "Still, this won't be forgotten." Willa turned her eyes back to the barn, smoke curling like sorrow into the dark. "Neither will this." By morning, the fire was out. What was left of the barn leaned inward, sagging like an old man who'd lost too many friends. Holt stared at it for a long while, jaw tight, before walking to the shed for tools. Willa joined him, without speaking, handing nails before he asked. They worked side by side, rebuilding the burned wall. Not for beauty, just strength. He handed her a hammer, and she took it like she belonged with it. "You don't have to help." "I'm not leaving," she said. He didn't look at her. "That's not what I meant." "I know." Her voice dropped softer. "But it's what I meant." That evening, when the hammering ceased and the horses were quiet, they sat on the porch watching dusk roll in like tidewater. Willa's face was streaked with soot, her hair tied back with twine. Holt's knuckles were raw. He leaned back in the chair with a grunt. "This place, it's never been clean of ghosts." She smiled faintly. "Then maybe that's why I fit." He turned to her. "That man, Jory, if he comes again—" "He won't." She looked down at her hands. He saw it. "Saw what?" "That I'm not scared anymore." They were quiet for a while. The kind of silence that isn't empty, just full of everything left unsaid. When the stars came out, Holt stood, walked into the house, and returned with something wrapped in cloth. He handed it to her. She opened it slowly, still warm bread, thick-crusted and golden, steam rising in wisps. "I baked it this afternoon," he said. Before the fire. She blinked. You still wanted to give it to me? You're still here, ain't you? She tore off a piece and handed him half. He didn't take it. He pushed the whole loaf toward her. You're mine now, he said quietly. Not like property. Like in. She stared down at the bread. I've never been anyone's anything. Then let this be the first good thing. She took the loaf into her lap, like it was something sacred. After a while, she said, What if people keep talking? Let them, Holt replied. They'll tire out. Truth don't. That night, she didn't go to the storage room. She stayed beside him on the porch until the candle burned down, until the wind quieted, until the dark no longer felt so full of threat. When she rose to go inside, he reached out, not to stop her, not to pull her in, just to offer his hand. She took it, not out of need, out of choice. Weeks passed, and the barn was whole again. Not the same, but better, stronger. Willa planted sunflowers along the rebuilt wall, their bright heads bobbing in the breeze. One afternoon, Holt carved 2 names into a wooden plank and nailed it to the gate. Grafton and Merrick. She stood beside him, eyes wide. That's my name. It is, he said. Always was. The townsfolk didn't speak much after that. They watched, of course, with their usual hunger for gossip, but there was less venom in it now. Perhaps because she walked with her head higher. Perhaps because Sheriff Cale didn't look kindly on liars. Or maybe, just maybe, because Holt never once bowed to their judgment. Cecily came by once with a jar of preserves and a muttered apology she wrapped in a compliment. You keep a clean house, she said. Shame I misjudged you. Willa took the jar. Not a shame. A habit. They left it at that. On a Sunday morning, Willa baked. Bread, biscuits, a small pie that didn't quite set, but tasted like summer anyway. She hummed while she worked, a tune that had no name but all the warmth of home. Holt watched her from the doorway, arms crossed, eyes soft. You hum when you're happy, he said. She smiled. I hum when I'm full. He stepped forward, brushing flour from her cheek with one finger. She didn't flinch. That night, they ate together in the barn under the light of a single oil lamp. She set the wax-mended jar between them, the candle inside burning steady. He raised a cup. To fire. She raised hers. To fences. They clinked the rims together, shared a smile. Later, she curled against him on the porch bench, blanket around her shoulders, head resting on his chest. His arms circled her waist, not tight, just enough to say I'm here. She closed her eyes, and for the first time in her life, slept without waking in fear. When morning broke, pink and slow over the prairie, Willa stepped into the yard, breathing deep. The air was thick with the scent of soil and hope. She walked to the barn, laid her hand against the new wood, and whispered something Holt couldn't hear. He didn't ask. Some prayers were meant for sky and silence. The day carried on. But something was different now. Not the land, or the barn, or even the girl. What changed was the space between them. Where once there was pity, now there was promise. And when Willa turned to Holt that evening, flour dust still on her cheek, she said, I'm yours, not like surrender, but like belonging. He took her face in his hands and answered, then I'm yours too. They didn't kiss. They didn't need to. Love in that place had always been quieter than fire, but far more enduring. Later that night, as the sky quilted itself in stars, a voice, ancient and kind, might have said, sometimes you are saved not by angels, nor by thunder, but by a man who gives you bread when the world gave you mud. And that is miracle enough.